In the land of Skyrim, you are the Dovahkiin, Dragonborn, the dragon-slaying, Daedra-fearing, serial-killing family man. And as the Dragonborn, it is your duty to learn the Thu'um, words of power scattered throughout all of Skyrim on walls of power. When you learn a word, you probably just stand there until the game says you learned the power and you move on as if you have major ADHD. But if you take a second to look at the wall of power, you will see rows of the words in the dragon language. Words, I might add, that can be translated so we can understand them. Words that each tell a story, some of great heroes, some of repulsive barbarians, some of Nords, but some of others like Khajiits and Argonians? Hi everyone, I'm Neloth, and I have recently become infatuated with these walls of power and the stories that each of them tell, and wish to preach their story for all to hear. Now, not every shout in the game has a wall of power, like Clear Skies and Dragonrend, and some only have one wall of power. But rest assured, I am about to tell you the stories that all the known walls of power will tell. This video will primarily be structured as a relaxing video, but also informative lore for those who wish to seek it. So, I will not be commenting on any of the stories the Walls of Power tell until the end of the video, and will have timestamps down below for each shout. So sit back, relax, and listen to what the ancient Nords and dragons wish to shout at us. Unrelenting Force. Fus, or Force, says, "Here lies the guardian keeper of the Dragonstone, and a force of unending rage and darkness." Whirlwind Sprint. Wold, or Whirlwind, says, "Here lies the body of Winjulf the Whirlwind, whose shining blade cut through an army of gods bind orcs." Na, or Fury, says, "Noble Nord, remember these words of the Whorefather. Oblivion hath no fury, like a shield maiden scorned." Kest, or Tempest, says, "Bekild raised this stone in her husband's memory, Eyolf, whose ship was lost in a dark tempest in the Sea of Tears." Fire Breath, Yol, or Fire, says, "This stone commemorates the child of King Yafnar, who was burned alive by the fire of the great dragon Lord Unost." Tor, or Inferno, says, "Asa raised this stone for her sister Thohild, the Inferno, whose passion burned hot as the red forge." Shul, or Sun, says, "Here fell Herfolder Sunslayer, mighty warlord of the Valley of Broken Dreams." Frost Breath, Foe, or Frost, says, "All praise Bard Lunario, whose golden music became frost here in the night." Kra, or Cold, says, "Here lies the beautiful Khajiit Anurasa, whose warmth cannot be extinguished even by cold death." Dean, or Freeze, says, "Wulfine raised this stone in memory of his queen Hrefna Ravenhair, whose eyes froze the blood of any man." Ice Form. Lees, or Ice, says, "Here lies the body of Eagleaf Iceblood, who met his end not in glorious combat, but at the cruel touch of the withering sickness." Slen, or Flesh, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. Even best steel may bend and break, but flesh of true men is unyielding." Noose, or Statue, says, "Seagroof raised this stone for his sister's memory, Lanal, whose beautiful face was as sharp and white as a statue carved from living ivory." Kyne's Peace. Khan, or Kyne, says, Here lies the body of Hela, friend to all beasts, servant of Kyne. May she find eternal rest in the forest of dreams. Durem, or peace, says, Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. Pray not for peace, for such is the wish of the weak and cowardly. Ove, or trust, says, Here fell shield maiden Valkyries, who fought with courage, but was wrong to trust the power of a borrowed sword. Slow time. Tid, or time, says, Vegunthar raised this stone in his father's memory, Hugunthar Time-Eater, slayer of the kings of the east, conqueror of Dune Creeth. Clo, or sand, says, Here fell mighty warlord Aban, child of the sands of Alakir, rest now in the soil of Skyrim. Ul, or eternity, says, This stone commemorates the warriors of the Black Regiment, whose souls now march in the plains of Sovngarde for all eternity. Storm call. Strun, or storm, says, And lo did mighty Heimverlund come from the brutal north, like a storm of unbridled vengeance from Sovngarde itself. Ba, or wrath, says, Here fell Hrothmar Wrathwolf from the savage plains. May his soul wander Sovngarde forever. Quo, or lightning, says, This stone commemorates the villagers of doomed Wunderheim, burned alive by the lightning of unending sorrow. Throw voice. Throw voice officially only has one word wall. However, there are 3 other translations in the game files of Skyrim, so we will go through all 4, starting with the official in-game translation. The word wall actually in the game for Zul me gut, meaning voice fool far, says, Modir the Far raised this stone in his brother's memory, Oskar the Fool, whose voice was weak and not the mighty shout of his clan. The first in-game file for Zul translates to say, Modir the Greybeard raised this stone in his brother's memory, Oskar, whose voice was weak and not the mighty shout of his clan. The second in-game file for May translates to say, Here lies the body of Amluth the Fool, who tried to feed the savage Udofrikte, but instead became the meal. The third in-game file for Gut translates to say, Here fell the lizard Niavan, who wandered far from home and died with honor in service of the companions. Elemental Fury. Su, or air, says, Here lies Fjolmod Foul Air, who stank as much on earth as his body does now in the ground. Grach, or battle, says, This stone commemorates the brave Theodrek, who died heroically in the Battle of the Serpent Sea. Dune, or grace, says, This stone commemorates the fair Princess Yrsa, who bewitched all of Tamriel with her grace and beauty. Marked for death. Kree, or kill, says, Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. To kill in glorious war is to honor oneself. To die in glorious war is to honor all of Skyrim. Loon, or leech, says, Here fell the treacherous thief Skorji Leechfingers, whose head was removed by the very axe he tried to steal. Os, or suffer, says, Thoringar raised this stone for his daughter's memory, Numi, whose fate it was to suffer the sting of many orc arrows. Dismay. Foss, or fear, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. Fear not the spectre of death, for he is the herald of glory and your guide to Sovngarde." Rue, or Run, says, "Here lies the body of Bard Romerius, who tried to run from some goblins, but slipped." Mar, or Terror, says, "This stone commemorates the doomed elf children of the autumn field, who fled in terror from the sharp swords of the ancient enemy." Disarm. Zune, or Weapon, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. The best weapon of Skyrim is the mind of a steel-souled warrior." Hal, or Hand, says, "Brothy raised this stone in memory of his son Odrav Anvilhand, who brought much honor to Clan Red Mountain." Vik, or Defeat, says, "This stone commemorates the bitter defeat of the Sisterhood of the White Rose, eaten to the last by the trolls of Corvag Crag." Animal Allegiance. Ran, or Animal, says, "This stone commemorates the horse Sarvira, the most courageous animal ever to charge the snowy battlefields, and gave his life for his lord." Mir, or Allegiance, says, "Laknir Littlehammer erected this stone in memory of his servant, humble Vakiza, who swore allegiance to the kings of Skyrim and died in grey autumn." Tach, or Pack, says, "Here died the savage she-wolf Ulfaida, slayer of men and beasts, and savage leader of the Crimson Pack." Aura Whisper. Las, or Life, says, "On this sacred ground did Freyda sacrifice her life, so that her many children might escape and someday vanquish her enemies." Yach, or Seek, says, "Here lies Ingnavar Ghostbear, who did seek glory on the battlefield of sorrows, but instead found death and dishonor." Near, or Hunt, says, "Here fell the fearless archer Unveld, servant, slayer of wolves, and lord of the great hunt." Become Ethereal. Fime, or Fade, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. It is duty of each man to live with courage and honor, lest he fade unremembered into darkness." Z, or Spirit, says, "Nafni raised this stone in memory of his father Roggenwald, whose spirit will forever guide his clan and haunt his enemies." Gron, or Bind, says, "Here lies foul necromancer Azaron the Cruel, who tried to bind the valiant dead of Sovngarde to the world of man and failed." Phantom Form is a shout used by the Greybeards, but unobtainable to the player. However, it has 3 word wall translations in the game files. Feek, or Mirror, says, "Here once stood the Mirror of Amusan, doorway to nightmares and portal of dreams." Lo, or Deceive, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. Deceive not your wife, for she is the oak in your shield, and the steel in your sword." Sach, or Phantom, says, "This stone commemorates the deeds of Siegleif the Unseen, who served great Skyrim not as a warrior in dawn, but as a phantom in twilight." And that was all of the shouts in the base game. However, there is still the expansions to Skyrim. Only one shout appears in the Dawnguard DLC. Drain Vitality. Gone, or Stamina, says, "Here lies the body of Svolo, who possessed strength to kill a dragon, but not the stamina to kill many." La, or Magica, says, "Lungrid raised this stone in her husband's memory of Thulgrima, keeper of Crimson Fire and lord of Magica." Has, or Health, says, "Here fell Onvid the Unbound, whose health declined after the War of the Pines, where he received a fatal wound." 4 shouts appear in the Dragonborn DLC, Cyclone. Then, or Wind, says, "This stone commemorates Volgrum the Sword in the Wind, the mercenary whose glory was short, but in memory eternal." Gar, or Unleash, says, "Noble Nords, remember these words of the Whorefather. A warrior fights his inner evils, but a king unleashes them on his enemies." Nos, or Strike, says, "This stone commemorates Hrodmir the Broken, who spent all his years and wealth to strike down the killer of his brother." Only one wall of power exists for this shout, and this shout is Bend Will. Gol, or Earth, says, "This stone commemorates Bar the Stubborn, who sat here still as Earth, awaiting enlightenment, only to become old instead of wise." Battle Fury. Mead, or Loyal, says, "Here lies the guardian who gained much glory. For his eternal loyalty, he joined the dead with great honor." Vor, or Valor, says, "This stone commemorates the valor of the guardian, noble servant of the dragons, whose fate it was to vanquish treacherous Mirak." Shan, or Inspire, says, "Noble Nord, forever remember the mighty guardian, whose great courage inspired both men and dragon." Dragon Aspect. Mul, or Strength, says, "All praise glorious Mirak, most powerful servant of all dragon priests, whose strength was granted by the gardener of mankind." Ka, or Armor, says, "Here once stood Mirak, who wore his faith as armor, shielded by Daedra for his eternal loyalty." Deve, or Worm, says, "This stone commemorates great Mirak, dragon priest of great wisdom, servant of the worm, and enemy of mankind." And that is all the walls of power translated, and all the stories and lessons they tell. I truly believe these walls of power give us an insight into the ancient lore of Skyrim that nothing else really could, especially telling tales of lesser-known Nord heroes, and even a Khajiit and 2 Argonians, which is fascinating and shows that many Nords, especially back in the mythic times, were accepting of all races and magic in their culture, and aren't like some specific Nords you may see in the ranks of the Stormcloaks in the 4th era. Also, something interesting to note is the writing structure of the dragon language. Now, I'm not that bitch-ass English teacher we all had in middle school, but words like the and this do not exist in the dragon language and only show in the game files with quotations for better legibility, but not actually displayed on the walls. Also, pronouns like his or her also do not exist on the dragon walls, and only translated with quotations. But this is most likely because dragons themselves do not have a gender, so the concept, similar to mortality in Dragonrend, is simply incomprehensible to them. When originally writing and voicing this video, I was quite sick, so I decided to have a lower tone to make it easier on myself, but also to make a much more soothing ASMR-like video that tells you about the lore. However, I am feeling a lot better and wish to do my outro as normal with my full strength, so you have officially been warned. And that's all the game files and I wrote, a video where I translated for you every single word wall that exists in the game and the secret stories and advice they share. If you enjoyed this soothing video, be sure to like the like button and like the subscribe button and bell notifications down below. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.